Welcome to Women Don't Do That, where we empower you with inspiration, knowledge, and skills to redefine your boundaries and unleash your potential. I'm Stephanie Mitton, founder and CEO of Beacon North Strategies and your guide. Small town girl turned CEO while navigating career, motherhood, ADHD, and chronic migraines. Our conversations range from interviews with visionary women to solo episodes filled with actionable insights. We are your hub for turning what ifs into let's go. Are you ready to redefine your possible? Let's get started. I am so excited about today's guest, which is Paige Turner. Paige is a working mother of 4. She uses her platform on TikTok and Instagram to share her thoughts on the mental load, on parenting, on her career. This is all stuff that we get into on the episode today. Her goal is to raise awareness on the mental load of motherhood. We're going to talk about what does that mean and advocate for equitable relationships for couples. If that sounds hard, Paige talks us through some tips about how to get started. Additionally, Paige is a passionate advocate for affordable and accessible childcare options. We talk about some of the differences between Canada and the US there and the impacts it has for women and working to make family life more manageable for all. Doesn't that sound great and like something that most of us need? So I hope that you have a great listen to this podcast. Welcome, Paige.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. As we kick things off, I want to know what motivates you to live your best life.
I don't know, honestly. My kids, obviously. But I think that's like a easy answer for any parent to give, right? That your kids motivate you to live your best life. But I also think I want to live a long life, right? So I want to live like a long, healthy life. And so what does that look like for me? I try to think about my career and how that impacts, the longevity of my life, the stress in my life, like just all those things, how I take care of myself. I do try to think about that because I would like, I know it's not always in our control, but I would like to live a long life and be here with my family. And so I do think about how all the different areas of our life play into that.
Yeah, it's really important to think about that. And I think you hit on something important there too, is in order to do that, you also need to try and be intentional,
Yeah.
to take care of yourself and try and address your stress and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What does life look like for you right now?
Yeah, so I have 4 kids and they're all pretty young. Depends on what you consider young, but my youngest is 2, my oldest is 7, almost 7. So, they're all on the younger side still. And so we are very much in the thick of it with
Hmm.
toddlers and, kids who are not totally self-sufficient at this point in time.
Right.
And so a lot of my days revolve around my kids, obviously.
Hmm.
So I do the mornings with my kids by myself. My husband leaves before my kids have even woken up. And so my mornings are crazy. I feel like I've lived like a whole life before I even start my work day.
It's true.
But yeah, I take my care of my kids, drop them off at the bus at daycare, and then I work. I work a full-time job. And so I sit at this desk in my office at home, 8 hours a day, give or take. And then in the like pockets in between, I'm a content creator. So oftentimes people ask me how I create my content and like with what time. You'll often see me in my kitchen and or at this desk. Like I'll have 10 minutes, I'll have an idea, I film it really quick, and that's the end of it. So
Hmm.
yeah, but my days are a little bit crazy, that's it's running around in the mornings and working 8 hours and then running around in the evenings and then going to bed.
Yes, I can appreciate that. I'm slightly ahead of you in terms of ages. My kids are 10 and 13.
Mm.
And I only have 2 though, but hopefully your story will be similar to mine and that it will get easier because we are now at the stage where kids can stay home alone and you can just leave the house. And that's like such a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's already easier, right? Like I
Yep.
had just my son with me the other day and he's the oldest and I had to get ready for a baby shower and I went upstairs for like an hour and just like did my hair and my makeup and just like did whatever I wanted to do. And he was fine. Like he didn't
Hmm.
call for me once. He didn't need me. Life changing. Can't do that with a 2-year-old, obviously. So,
Yes.
I'm getting glimmers of what it will look like in the future. I don't want to wish away the baby years or the toddler years, but at the same time, once you get a taste of that independence again, you're like, oh, that looks pretty nice.
Yes,
So,
yeah. I have a girlfriend whose kids had gotten older and then ended up also having a younger child and will often I think see me and be like, "Oh, like you have more independence and you're able to do some of these things." And I'm like, "I know it's just a nature of having a younger child around. It really is a game changer." And you kind of forget that sometimes as your kids get older. And so going back to that stage has been a bit of a challenge, but I'm like, you're gonna get there. It's just gonna
yeah,
take a little bit longer.
exactly.
Your content, not exclusively, but often ends up being about the mental load.
Mhm.
How did you end up becoming like the go-to person on social media about mental load?
Yeah, I think I was living it. I think all of us moms and parents have lived it, a version of it. And it was, I reached a breaking point in my marriage where I felt like I was really unseen. The mental load of everything was unseen. The amount of domestic labor I was doing was unseen. And I had read the book Fair Play, which was really kind of like a light bulb moment for
Mm,
me where I was like, oh, this book is kind of putting into words what I'm feeling. And so that was kind of for me the moment where I was able to start articulating to my partner at a minimum what I
yeah.
was experiencing. And then I was able to articulate it to, say, my therapist and say, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Um, because prior to that, I'd just been angry. I was just
Yes.
angry and frustrated and felt unsupported. And so I came to talking about the mental load because I was living it and having conversations about it in my real life. And so, to your point, I don't exclusively talk about the mental load. I didn't intend to talk about the mental load on social media. It just kind of happened as I was sharing my life. And I don't share like the ins and outs of my life, but I share kind of things that have happened or along the way or like how I think about marriage, parenting, etc. And I think the mental load really struck a nerve because for many of us, it's this invisible thing that nobody sees. And unless you talk about it, it remains invisible. And
Yes.
so I talk about it in hopes to help other people, especially women, articulate what they're feeling and put words to their experience, because oftentimes that's the biggest hurdle, which is being able to describe what it is that's happening. And then once they have that, I'm hopeful, and I've heard from many women on social media that it's been helpful to start conversations, and that's really my goal, right? It's not
Mhm.
to place blame or to um, cause rifts. It's really to bring to light the work that many women are doing so that way they can, if they want to, course correct and share that load with other people in their lives.
Right. So for people who are listening, who don't know what mental load is, how would you describe it for them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways people have described it. I like to say it's like that running checklist in your brain of all the things you need to do and remember for your life to function. And it's a list that's always getting longer, no matter how many things you check off of it. It's remembering that your daughter's well visit is coming up. It's remembering that you need to sign that form for your son's school, remembering that your daughter's almost out of diapers, right? Like this long list of things that you are constantly just checking off. My friend Zach also has said it's similar to like the open tabs on your desktop. How
Right.
many open tabs do you have, right? How many
Right.
things are you keeping open so that way you remember them later? It's that. It's just the running checklist in your brain of
Right.
all of the things that your family needs. And it's all of the work that tends to go into something before you actually do it. So when you think of like signing your kid up for swim lessons, right? You have to just even be aware that there is a sign up and knowing what time the sign up is and knowing which lesson you're going to try to sign them up for and what level are they. And if you don't know, do you have to call and figure out what level they are, right? It's all of that work that goes into the actual task of doing something.
Right. And I hear you talk sometimes on social media, like what is and what isn't mental load. So can you share that distinction a bit?
Yeah, I think the one that people resonated with the most is that cooking dinner isn't the mental load. Like cooking dinner is not the mental load. Cooking dinner is a task. It's something we all have to do. Cooking dinner can be fun or not fun, depending on your life and what you like to do. But the mental load is everything that went into cooking dinner, right? It's knowing which meat was about to expire. It's knowing which vegetable your kid's actually going to eat. It's knowing what time you have to cook dinner based on when the kids are coming home. It's knowing whether or not you need to make more because you need leftovers for tomorrow. It's knowing, oh no, I just used all the salt. I need to add it to the grocery list. It's all of the things that go into cooking the dinner
Hmm.
every single day that, is the mental load of cooking dinner. It's not actually the act of cooking. Cooking is not typically the hard part of the task. It's all the things that went into it, the decision fatigue that can go into just deciding what to make for dinner.
Hmm. I find the decision fatigue piece gets me as a CEO who's running multiple brands. I find by the time I'm done work, I don't want to make another single decision. And I quite enjoy
Yeah.
the decision making in my work, but I just don't have any left. And we started doing HelloFresh a few
Yeah.
nights a week. And my husband is like, why are we doing this? Like I said, for me, it's about the decision making. Like I order once, which is super easy, and we don't have to think about it again. There's no what's for dinner. The fact that even like the recipes are very explicit. It's all laid out. I don't have to think
Yep.
about it. I'm like, otherwise, I'm tired. We end up ordering in. Like it doesn't work. So I'm like, it's part of my sanity. So this is what we're doing.
Yeah. We've started doing that too. Like 3 nights a week or something
Yeah.
like that. We'll do a meal kit. And yeah, it really was that. It's like, I don't want to have to decide what we're cooking. I just want to cook something. I don't even care because I'm at that point where, and I've shared this on social media, where like I could care less actually what I eat. I don't
Yes.
even, the food is fuel for my body and nothing more than that.
Hmm.
And if it were up to me and my husband weren't home and the kids were fed, I would just eat some crackers and call it like a day
Yes.
and just
Yeah.
be done because I don't care. Because I'm so tired of making decisions because I cook 3 meals a day and 17 snacks. I don't care at
Yes.
that point. And I love food. I like food, but I just don't have it in me. And
Right.
so I think that's the other side of it, which is there's so many decisions that parents especially make every single day that can just feel exhausting. And if you are also a parent with a job outside of the home, then you're making decisions there too. And so it can just be a lot.
Hmm. I find even it's more motivating for me. Like when I'm tired and don't really feel like cooking, I'm like, I paid for this. It's
Oh
going to go
yeah.
bad. I need to do it. And that kind of
Hmm.
helps me get to the finish line where before I probably would have just ordered in or something or made something really unhealthy.
Yeah, there's the accountability. Like I like to sign up for fitness classes because I know that if I don't go, I'll get charged. Whereas
Yep.
if I'm like last night I intended to go for a walk. Monday nights are like my night without without doing bedtime. And I typically go to yoga, but I was like, no, it's 75 degrees. It's so warm out. I should go for a walk. It didn't happen because the kids were yelling. My husband was like trying to cook them dinner, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna stay here and help. And if I had yoga, I would have been like, very sorry, have to go. Like, I will see you
Yes.
later.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have something I need to go to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you and I are having this conversation. Obviously, you talk about it a lot. For people who are just maybe hearing this for the first time, or maybe if we have some men listening, or even women for their own lives, why should they care about this? Why is it important?
I think for me, the one reason I think it's important is because the longer that this work remains invisible, the mental load and even the domestic labor, right? Or the emotional labor that women do oftentimes, for as long as it remains invisible, it can go unacknowledged, unpaid, and it will remain pretty inequitable. Like I know in my home, I had a partner who was always fantastic, like a great partner, very present, always around, was with me for bedtime and bath time, but was never the one in charge of anything, right?
Right.
Like I was delegating everything. I was the person who knew which pajamas fit and which pajamas didn't fit. I know all these things because I'm the one responsible for them. And the more you talk about them and bring them to light, the more that you can share that work with your partner if they're willing and able, which you hope that they are. And I think it's really important, especially, as a working woman, um, the workforce is not equitable, right? Women get paid less than men. We are
Hmm.
treated differently than men. If you're a woman with children, you're treated much differently than men, but you're also treated differently than your female counterparts who don't have kids. And
Hmm.
so that exists because there's no equity at home. Women are expected to do the bulk of the caretaking and domestic labor, which pulls them away from work, which puts them into more flexible careers or hybrid work or remote work, which we're seeing now often means they're not getting promotions or increases in their pay. And men aren't expected to do this, yet they are also husbands and fathers, and there's no penalty for them. And so I think until there's equity at home, there will also be no equity in the workforce. And so
Hmm.
it permeates all parts of our life, and it happens like a little by little over time. You don't realize it's happening until you're really in the thick of it. And you're like, wow, how did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? And I will say it also happens to women without children, right? You're
Mm,
married, but you're buying your mother-in-law all her birthday gifts and your husband never does it. You're
right.
the one who's planning all of the brunches to celebrate family when you need to, right? You're the person who's scheduling the vet visits for your dog. Somehow those things
Hmm.
became your responsibility. How did that happen? Why did that
Right.
happen? Um, it's societal norms, gender norms, but I think more than anything for me, I just want women and men to have equity across the board. And I also think men should want to be involved in this work because this is the work that brings you close to your children and your partner and your home. And we should walk away from, or, to each their own, but I personally would like to walk away from the idea that men's best and biggest, like most important value they can bring is money. Because I just don't think that's it.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I appreciated what you said about the equity at home piece related to the workplace. I haven't really thought about it quite like that before, and that makes a lot of sense. And I've also often thought about male leaders and thought if they were hopefully more authentically themselves and more involved in their kids' lives, then we would see leadership differently
Mhm.
and it would open up space for women too. And I think what you shared added another really important layer, which is how we address how women are seen to begin with and in those relationships, and then how that translates back to the work environment.
It's also the idea that when women go to work, they've abandoned their kids. When women put their kids in daycare, they're
Yes.
not raising their children anymore. But when men do it, that's okay.
Yeah.
And men will sacrifice time with their families. They will put everything into their work, but they're building something important for the
Hmm.
world. And that's
Hmm.
admirable. But if a woman were to do that, she's selfish and she abandoned her
Yes.
family, right? So it's the narrative. I really just think it's about changing that narrative. And if we keep staying quiet about all this work, about all the things that women tend to do that don't go acknowledged, but often are a big reason why they're not doing the same things men are doing,
Hmm.
then nothing will ever change. And so, um, I had a really viral video on TikTok about men who are successful because they had partners who
Yeah.
gave up their job, watched their kids, did these things behind the scene that allowed them to be successful, to put everything into their work because they didn't have to think about what was for dinner. They
Yeah.
didn't have to worry about whether somebody was caring for their kid or what time daycare pickup was. They don't even know
Yes.
where the daycare is, right?
Yes.
That's a big part of it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that video and those messages is really important because it's true. And it makes me think about one of the things that is really important to me with my podcast is showing women leaders as their authentic selves, so that
Mhm.
I think sometimes we look at leaders or CEOs or people doing interesting things and think that could never be me. My life is too chaotic. But when women open up and are honest, you realize, oh, that CEO doesn't know what they're doing either. They're struggling with their kids at home too. And I think that's really important for women to see themselves. I think the second thing is you'll have to hear men say, or other people, like that women don't want to be in those types of roles. And even women themselves talk about that. And that can be true for some people, but sometimes I think it
Yeah.
is because their lives are so chaotic and because of the mental, they can't even imagine taking on more and doing more. And so it becomes, of course, they don't want to, or they feel like they can't, or they don't see themselves there, because how could they possibly?
How could they when a woman is a breadwinner, she does more domestic labor and caretaking than her partner,
Yeah.
right? How can you? Because
Hmm.
even when you are taking on those roles or you're the one making 5x your partner, you're still doing more work at home. So your plate is more full. You even see actually when a man is a stay-at-home dad and his wife is full-time working in the sole breadwinner, she still does similar amounts of work at home. And if you look at the chart, a stay-at-home mom obviously is doing like 90% to the 10% of her working partner. When it's
Yeah.
a working mom and a stay-at-home dad, that's not the case. And so why would women want to raise their hand to do more work?
Yeah.
Why would you raise your hand to do more work, to be more burnt out, to be more stressed? What would the point be other than that you might hit burnout, right?
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
that's the thing. I've had opportunities at work and I've been transparent. I'm like, not right now. I can't. I actually can't. I couldn't imagine a world in which I had the brain space to do it. I
Hmm.
don't. And I'm exhausted by 7:30 every day. I've been going all
Yes.
day long, and I can't imagine a workplace that would require me to work till 7:30 and then also try to figure out care for my kids, right? So I
Yes.
think again, until that equity is there at home, until men are participating in the same way that women are, it will be really difficult for women to say yes to those things, because there's also, when men say yes, there's no consequence for them. In a sense, when women say yes, there's consequences. There's resentment from their partners. There's the narrative that they are a bad mother, right? There's
They're
all this.
nagging.
Exactly. And we're told we have to outsource. You hear that a lot. I'm sure you've heard that, but like outsource
Something
the
I
food,
do.
outsource the laundry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Outsource the, the
The
house cleaning. But
cleaning. Mhm.
yes, but when men are in positions of power, people don't tell them to outsource. They tell them to have their partner do it.
Right.
And they save the money, and then their partner does that work. And so it's like, there's that too, where it's like, yeah, you can work hard and have a career, but it will be on you to make it work. There is no partner to support that.
Paige, that is so true. It is on you to make it work versus, yeah, there's no, sometimes when my kids are little, I remember joking, being like, I need a wife. How do I get a wife too?
Yeah,
Like, how do I
right.
make this happen? Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about. It kind of drives me crazy just when you pull it all back to the basics. I think Renee from the mom room talks about this, and I've had her on the podcast, and I think she did some um versions, I think with like play toys in a house, and was like,
Yes.
dad goes
Yep.
to work, mom stays at home. Like this is in particular like with a stay-at-home mom, and then they both come home from like the work that they've done, and then they share the task. Like it's so basic, and yet I see the kinds of reactions and comments you get from men online. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, what do you not understand? You're all supposed to be such smart people, and it's so basic. It gets me really riled up.
Yeah. Yeah, the commentary is hard because I always try to put in my brain. I actually heard this from a boss of mine who I really enjoy working with. And he's actually very supportive of women in the workforce and women at home. And I really loved working for him. But I remember when I first started, I was like 24. I've worked for him for a long time. And he said, um, there was this guy who was really angry. He was a C-suite guy and he was pissed. And he sent me this like crazy email. And I was like, what do I do? He's like, I don't know, Paige, is this a loud problem, or is this actually a big problem? Like, is it loud or is it big? And I was like, oh, maybe it's just loud, right? Like maybe he's just really loud. And I try a bit with the comments section to be like, this is just a really loud guy.
Mhm.
However, I know it's also a big problem. Like the commenters are the loud guys. There is a problem. I don't think most men come home and don't lift a finger. I think most men think they're doing their fair share. But if you were really to put it down on paper and list every mental task, every physical task, every caretaking task, and
Mhm.
you tallied it up, you would see that women are still doing the bulk of the work. So
Right.
I think most men think that they are an equal partner. They want to be an equal partner. They want to kind of like bring down the patriarchy, but they don't realize how they benefit from it. They don't realize the things that their partner is doing at all. And that is where for
Right.
me I try to focus my time, because I do think that a lot of it is actually it's a big problem, but those guys, those really loud ones who are like, don't dare ask me to fold laundry, like I hope that's not the majority. I really do.
Right. Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I follow your content closely enough to know that Paige has a download in her in her
I
link
do.
in her bio if you want to see her list of tasks, which is really important. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so it's actually from Fair Play, which I already referenced. So Fair Play is a book
Hmm.
by Eve Rodsky, which was the light bulb moment for me. And here's the thing. I think some people love the Fair Play method, which is like a game that she has. Other people take parts of it. I'm kind of a person who took parts of it and then made it work for my family. But she has a game that is essentially those tasks. It's all those
Hmm.
tasks. And obviously, there are certain things that apply to your family or don't apply to your family. And maybe there's even tasks that she doesn't have that you want to add, right? And so, what I did personally was I put them into an Excel spreadsheet, because that's just how my brain works. And I wanted to be
Me
able to see it.
too.
I wanted to see it. I wanted to be able to reference it. I wanted to be able to make changes to it quickly. I wanted to be able to say, when my partner was like, no, that's not my job, I could go back and be like, hey, on June 23rd, we said this was your job.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it is. Right. And then have a conversation.
Right.
Um, and so I find it really helpful. I know other people do because I have a bajillion downloads on it, but I think, it is from Fair Play, but I do think it's the idea that sometimes just putting it on paper
Hmm.
brings to perspective what's happening,
Right.
right? Because when we did it, I
Hmm.
had 60 or something, 65, and my husband had 15
Right.
tasks,
Well,
which
and
is a
I think
problem.
too, I've done a similar list myself before, and I think what I did and what yours does too is uh it also breaks it down from like what's an everyday task, which is
Yes.
what is a once in a while task, because there is a difference in that, right? So, I know for myself, I was a bit surprised actually, in a good way, I guess, when I made our list, that he actually did more than I thought he was doing. I still was doing more, but there was more there, so that was important for me to see. However, a lot of his tasks are like renovations, which is maybe like a once a year project for like 2 weeks, not which doesn't make up for like most of the cooking or most of the laundry or whatever your
Right.
situation is. And so writing it out can be eye-opening for everybody, and drilling it down to some of those specifics also helps.
Yeah. And then there's the question of like, I think there's this idea of a lot of the tasks that men historically have done are away from children, away from the home, mowing the lawn with your
Yes.
podcast on, like
Yes.
doing those things away from kids
Right.
is is different. And so like doing a task that requires you to like cooking dinner when I have four kids screaming in the kitchen is like not my idea of a good time, right? Like it's
Right.
stressful. It's a lot to manage. And the baby's saying, hold me. And I'm like, okay, hold on. Like, give me a second. I got a knife in my hand. Right. So I
Yes.
think there's that too, which is like solitary work and then work while caretaking. And though
Hmm.
that can make it a lot harder. And then I think there's also this, I don't know if you've talked about this on your podcast, but I think there's this kind of reckoning women are having around remote work, where there's this
Yes.
expectation that because I'm at home, I should be able to take a call and fold laundry at the same time.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
I should be able to, pick up my kids from the bus stop while, filling out spreadsheets. Like there's this expectation that because women work from home more often because they're looking for more flexibility and freedom in their schedule, that therefore they can also do more domestic labor. So it's like
Yes.
now do two jobs
Yeah.
at the
I
same time.
yeah, I think it's so true. And I've been thinking about this a lot, how this transition from the pandemic to hybrid work or to working from home more, women in particular, I think find that interesting. And and one of my girlfriends was saying, like, I love those days because I can do laundry, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but it's allowing you to continue to do more. It's allowing you to fulfill that role. That's why you want to do it. And
Yep.
why, and she's like, but I like those things. I'm like, do you? Or is it that like getting those things done feels good because you have to get them off the list? But like, what if someone was helping you with those and it wasn't just your responsibility? And if your partner stayed home, would they be doing it too?
Mm-hmm.
My partner recently changed jobs and does work from home sometimes, and so it's been really interesting. And I've kind of joked before, like, you didn't do any laundry today. Like, where's,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I can see it, right? Like he is a half an hour drive away from home when he goes into the office. I work from home for the most part. So of course, when it's kids' appointments and everything, it's me for the most part because I'm so close to the school. Now that he's working remotely, some of that can change, but it, it's part of that system, right? It's, well, I'm the closest, so I should do that. And
Mm-hmm.
yet there is an expectation, certainly in our relationship, that I'm also bringing home a big chunk of the bacon. And so it's
Yeah.
like, how do I manage all of those expectations? Because it's not just around home, it's also around how much money I'm making and contributing for the
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. I also think oftentimes this starts very early on in becoming parents. It actually starts with like maternity leave if you are lucky enough to get one,
Yes.
where oftentimes men don't take as much leave or don't have as much leave. But even if they have it, oftentimes they don't take it for fear of the repercussions at work, oftentimes, right? They don't want to take the leave because they don't want it to blow back on them later. But
Yes. Yeah.
men often don't take as much leave when their kids are born. And
Hmm.
so they will say, you can do the overnights because I have to work tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? And the paid work takes priority in those instances. Oftentimes I'll be like, well, I have to work tomorrow and I have to be on at work. But in my mind, it's like, your partner's taking care of a newborn baby, they also need to be on and refreshed and ready, right? But my bigger thing is like what that does is it sets up a dynamic where
Hmm.
mom is expected to do these things. And when or if she goes back to work, say she goes back to, I went back to work at 8 weeks. I went back to work at 8 weeks. This didn't happen in my marriage, but for example, if I'd been doing overnights for those 8 weeks by myself, and then I went back to work. What I hear from most women is that they still continue to do the overnights, even though they are now back at work too. And their partner will say, well, whenever I do it, the baby just wants you. You're just better at it. And she's better at it because she's been doing it for 8 weeks, right? It's not
Yeah,
because she was inherently better at overnight feedings, right? And so there's this pervasive thing that happens very early on where we place this protection around the guy's time. But even when the woman is doing the same
right,
thing as him, we say, you can do both.
right.
You can do both. You can do the overnights, get no sleep, and go to work. And we need you to
Right.
go to work because we need your money. But
It's
it's crazy.
it's such an interesting dynamic for me, Paige. Because being in Canada, our mat leaves are so
Mm,
different. And
I
so
know.
when I
Yeah.
hear you guys talk about the fact that this is still like you experience these things on such a short mat leave, it kind of blows my mind. I'm like, how in like 8 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever you get is this so
Yeah.
ingrained? Because here in Canada, most people take like 12 months to 18 months. When my kids were little, 12 months were the max that you could take, which is a long time. And so I found all of a sudden I'm on mat leave. I'm at home more. I took a bunch of new responsibilities in that used to be shared. And then after
Yeah.
doing them for a year or a year and a half, it's really hard to now be like, your life was made easier. And now I'm giving some of these back to you.
Yeah.
Um, that I think is really hard. And so it blows my mind that that is happening at 8 weeks. Like, what the heck?
I know. Yeah. Going back, I went back at 8 weeks with all four of my kids. And looking back, I don't know how I did it, but what I did was I actually provided childcare for my two younger ones full time while working, which was also a whole thing because it was the pandemic and I couldn't get a
Right,
daycare spot and you couldn't have a nanny. It was 2020. Like it was a whole thing, right? And it
right,
was like
right,
allowed at the time because there was no other option. Like we were all doing it,
right.
but I was I was burnt out. I was really at my end at a certain point.
Hmm.
And so, I think it can be a recipe for disaster, especially if you are a working woman who plans to go back to work after you have kids. If you take on all of those things during a mat leave without like really communicating what that will look like when you go back,
Yes.
it can be very difficult to navigate. It gets really comfortable for the person who didn't have to
Of
do anything.
course, who wouldn't want that? Like, I would love that
Yeah,
too. Like, take all
of
that stuff
course.
and don't get back to me.
Why
Um,
not?
when you were talking earlier about um what often happens in male and female relationships, about the jobs they do and when kids are around and when they aren't, it made me think about I've written a blog, I haven't put it out yet, so we'll be coming soon about this idea because it's happening to me that so I'm almost 40 and all of a sudden I'm making bread and more interested in gardening and all of these things. And I think about that and I think, why does that happen to women? Why are those the types of things we go to when we older? And my one theory is that it's because when our kids were young, we stopped doing, for the most part, all of the things that used to be our interest. So I was a gymnast. I can't do
Mm,
gymnastics anymore. I was a singer, but a high level singer. I had to practice an hour a day. When my kids were little, did I do that? No. So you're trying to redefine your identity, find things you enjoy as you get more independence from your children. And yet you're picking gardening and things like this that are close to your house, where my husband has always played hockey and never had to stop.
exactly. Yep. Men tend to have more time for rest and recreation than women do. Again, that's
Hmm.
that idea that their time is protected,
Yes.
um, that they feel more freedom to spend time away from home and their kids, right? Imagine
Hmm.
if you're a working mom and you work 8 hours a day and then you tell somebody that you actually don't go home after work, you go play tennis for 2 hours. They'd say, like, well, what about your kids?
Yeah,
Right? But people don't say
100%.
that to men when they say they're going to go join a golf league every Wednesday night. They're like, oh,
Hmm.
that makes sense. Of course you
Right.
are.
Yes.
And so men tend to do things also, again, that don't involve children.
Hmm.
Golf, rock climbing, car maintenance, whatever, all these things that are hobbies that don't allow for children to be present.
Hmm.
Um, Women tend to take up hobbies that they can do from home. They can
Yeah.
do them with their children. They can do them in pockets of time. I think that's the other thing, pockets of
Right.
time.
15
You
minutes.
can, yeah, you can knead the bread and then put it back to rise, right? You don't
Right.
have to do it all at one time. Um, I actually think it's important that women are really intentional if you can be with and have a willing and able partner and a good dynamic to actually find hobbies that take you outside of the home. I was just talking, I'm not good about this, but I was just talking to some girlfriends in a group chat and I was like, we should start taking tennis lessons. We should do that. We
Yes.
should go do that. And then we should go play tennis. And
Yes.
we should learn how to do this and take ourselves out of the house, book a court, and not always be just trying to see each other during play dates. Like, why are we
Right.
doing that? Let's find
Yes.
something that's actually real that we can do.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's why a lot of people love pickleball, right? Like it's just something that takes you out of the house. And especially with this a shift to working from home, I tell people all the time, I see these four walls
Yeah.
all day, every day. I
Yeah.
don't get other human interaction. I don't get to even talk to somebody in a break room, right? Like I'm in my
Right.
house by myself, surrounded by my kids' things, by my chores. My kids leave. I start my first call. I end my last call and they're already home, right? Like that is
Right.
my day. I don't get anything else. And so I actually do think it's so important if you can to get out of your house. Like just get out of your house, get out of that environment
Yes.
because you're just inundated with all of the work all of the time.
Yes, no, it's so important. I think you guys should take up tennis. Um,
I hope we do. It's in the
yes.
group chat. We'll see if it, makes it
Right.
out.
I think one of the most important things I did when my kids were little, I wish I was having fun, but I do government relations and lobbying,
Mm,
and so have never and will never work a 9 to 5 job. And
yeah.
so when my husband would have his like once a week playing hockey, my once a week was going to work events. And
Mm,
so I was able to have that one night to myself, but it was always for work, which now I'm like, was that a good decision? Although my career grew really fast, so there's
maybe.
I
Yeah.
have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
However, what it did do was force that my husband when the kids were little, like developed the ability to put the kids to bed on his own and like handle that. And
Yeah.
I have friends where, we'll go for girls' weekend and maybe they've driven 6 hours and like they need to leave early because they need to go home because their husband can't handle it. And I think
Yeah.
getting out of the house and building that in is really important and setting that expectation for your partner.
I
Um,
agree.
I think Paige, you'll find this really funny. When my husband started fishing a few years ago,
Mm,
and so he would we have a little fishing boat, and he would take it out and fish for a bit and like come back. And so I used to be like, okay, it's my turn now. And I would go and park the boat in the middle of the lake and read a book
I love it.
because I
Yeah.
was
I
like,
love that.
why not? Like, why do you get that time? I'm gonna
Mhm.
go fishing and read my book and then come back later.
Yeah, seriously though, like that's the thing. It's like I don't know where like what the area you live in is. It's not like this where I am, but I hear from a lot of women. They're like, "Oh, my husband's a huge hunter, so is
Yeah,
hunting, and you
he's
can't bring
fun.
kids with you hunting, or like you don't usually want to, and
Yeah.
so like that's the other thing. Or it's like, fine, you want to go fish, fine, bring the kids. They'll love fishing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Teach
Bring
them
the
to
kids.
fish,
Yeah.
right? Bring the kids,
And now
right?
that
So
they're older, I don't care, right? Because I can now read a
yeah,
book on the beach quietly, even if the kids are there and he's fishing. But when they were young, I was just,
you can't.
yeah,
Yeah,
people would say, like, oh, would you have another child? And I was like, listen, like, my husband is definitely moved past it, right? He's now like, I'm into these other things that take chunks of time. I'm like, I would definitely be divorced or he would be dead. Like, I could not right now. Like, there is
yeah,
no third child coming into this scenario because it's not
yeah.
right. Like, I
Yeah,
couldn't
and I
handle
think
that.
people think it's the negative to say things like that, right? Like I've said before, like I almost divorced him. I was over it. I was done. I
Yep.
was so frustrated, not because I didn't love him, not because I thought he didn't love me, but because I felt so unseen and unsupported. And it wasn't even intentional on his part, but I had said it a bajillion times. I was like, please, I need you to do more. And he'd say, tell me what to do. And I'd be like, I have told you what to do. Like, I
You're
don't know.
just
I have
not
to keep
listening.
telling you what to do. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really hard because I don't think it's an individual failure of us as women or them as men in these heteronormative instances. I think it is societal, right? Men are raised to believe they deserve this time. They're raised to believe that their value is in their work. They're raised to believe that being just present is enough. You don't have to be the person in charge of things. You just have to be there to support your partner. You don't actually have
And
to.
even that is a stretch from what used to happen. So I'm already doing
Exactly.
more by being
Mhm.
home for dinner or taking Johnny to the
Yes.
lessons.
Or that stat where it's like, oh, millennial dads change more diapers than like dads in the 80s. And it's like, congratulations. There's no stat like that about women because we've always been changing all of the diapers. Like
Yeah. And also
that,
we're now in the corporate world too. We're doing all of
exactly.
that and
It's 74% of women with children are in the workforce.
yeah.
Like there's this weird like idea I think that a lot of people hold on to, which is that women are at home. And
Yes.
the majority of us are not. Like we're
Yes.
working in some way or another while also still getting all this stuff done at home and taking care
Mhm.
of our kids.
I see that a lot in your comments. Like men cannot seem to fathom and understand that in some relationships, women actually make more money than their partners.
Yep.
I'm like,
Hmm.
what? Like, it's 2024. What is going on in your head?
Yeah. Or even if they make more, their job's easier, is always what I hear, right? So like people will
Mhm.
say this to me because I work at a desk. I make the same amount, if not maybe more than my partner at any given time from like content stuff. And then he works a lot of overtime. Like that's how his job works. But he's a blue collar guy. So he's doing physical labor. That's his job, manual labor. Um, and so people will say, like, sure, you make as much as him, but your job's not as hard. So you should be doing all these other things, right? So the first thing they'll say is like, well, do you pay the bills? And I say, yes, I do. And then they say, well, what is your job? What is his job? Oh, well, his job's harder. So therefore, it is your job to do everything at home. And it feels like the benchmark is always moving, right? It used to be like, well, if you want to be in the workforce and you need to make X amount of money, and if you want to put your kids in daycare, then your salary has to cover it. And if you
Yeah.
want this, and you have to make as much as I do. And then it's like, well, if you actually want to not do the domestic labor, then your job actually has to be physically hard. If your job's not physically hard, then you don't have an excuse, right? And so it's just like, it feels like this moving target that you just can never hit because it's always moving, it's always
Right.
changing. And so I don't, I take it with a grain of salt. I think about my marriage and my life and what I want and how we depict that for our children and what they'll expect growing up, as more important than what these men in my comments say.
Yes.
It can be incredibly frustrating, right? To be like, I earn more, I earn the same. Like, why is
Right.
my time still less valuable?
Right. And even when you figure out who's going to do what, maybe because of your jobs, maybe you do have a job that is a lot more in a box than your partner. And so maybe you do divvy up where one person takes more than the other. But the difference is you're actually sitting down and talking about it and making the list and discussing and
Mhm.
actually reviewing what your life looks like. And not
Mhm.
only that, but what you want it to look like in the future. Um, I remember early in my career, people saying to me, are you going to go back to work or whatever when you have kids? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, one already make more than my husband, but also if I don't go back, the the limit, especially when you're taking some of those longer mat leaves, I would say too, where we do in Canada, um, will limit my career so much that the future potential changes, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't just think about what does daycare cost now. Your kids are only in daycare for so long. It's
Mhm.
really also about like that future career growth and where you'll be and what you'll be doing. And I think we think about a lot of that stuff way too small. I want to ask you when you mentioned about the divorce piece, can you talk about how you moved past that? Because there'll be a lot of people listening to this that's probably where they're at. So what helped you?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and I say this all the time, the key is to have a willing and able partner who actually wants to be an active participant. And my husband did, right? He did. But it really was coming down to him either like saying he would do more, but not actually following through, or really relying on me to be delegating everything at every given time. So honestly, we did start with the fair play method and then evolved from there, but that was kind of our jumping off point. And what I will say is it wasn't fast, it wasn't quick. There was a lot of resentment on my end. There was a lot of like defensiveness and insecurity on his end. Um, but we'd been together, I think before we had kids, we'd been together, I don't know, 14 years or something. It wasn't like we just met and had kids and like didn't know each other. We knew each other. And so I knew at his core, he loved me and wanted things to work. And so I had to put faith in that. But I would say it did take a long time. I would say it took like a year and a half before I felt like I could trust him in
Right.
this and could rely on him. And now we don't ever have to have these conversations really. Like very
Right.
rarely do we have to say, hey, you said you were going to do the dishwasher every day and you never do it. Like we don't have to have that conversation because it's just understood kind of what we each own. And
Hmm.
our home runs more smoothly now. We're both happier because there's no fighting and we're just like moving through life. And so I would say I personally am a big advocate if you have the financial means to do therapy. I personally did individual therapy. We did a little bit of couples counseling, but it was all virtual and it was really kind of hard at the time. But for us, it was just like constantly having conversations about this until we didn't have to have them anymore. And I would say, like, you can rebuild trust because that is what it is at some point. It's like a lack of trust that your partner is an active participant in your marriage and with your kids, right? And
Hmm.
so we rebuilt that trust and we were able to move past it, but it wasn't easy and it
Hmm.
wasn't quick. So I do think that's important to acknowledge that it doesn't change overnight. Them saying like,
Yeah.
yes, I'll do the dishes doesn't erase everything. And if you were a husband or a man who's going through this, you have to know that just because you folded the laundry 2 times doesn't mean that she forgives you for everything you haven't done for the last 4 years or however long, right? Like it takes
Right.
a lot of time.
Yeah. And for women too, if you want your relationship to work, I think be willing to try to communicate that. Because I find sometimes for myself, I'll catch myself being so annoyed at something. And then I realize, maybe I've been, I don't know, just something adding up. Like maybe they're never cleaning up the dishes if you mostly cook or something like that. And then I realize, but I've never told him.
Hmm.
So yes, he should be doing those things, but also if I don't communicate how this is making me feel or that this is a problem, and like you said, it's like, well, do they actually change and will they change over time? That's the important piece, but also that you have to start somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, it sucks that the onus is on women to start these conversations and to
Yes.
hold our partners accountable, and that's not fair. It's not.
No, no.
And it's not enjoyable, transparently. But if you're the person who's benefiting from all of this, why are you looking to break it down, right? I mean, they're not going to raise their hand to do more work, unfortunately, or at least most of them won't. I
Yes.
do think the key is having a partner who is willing and able to see you, to see the work, and to participate in it. And if you have a partner who isn't, that's a different conversation. Like if you have somebody who says, that's actually not my job and I don't ever intend to do those things, that's hard to come back from. I didn't have that kind of partner. So that wasn't my experience, but I've heard from a lot of women who do. And then it comes down to, okay, then how do you want to make it work?
Mhm.
And then what does that look like?
When I think that's what we're seeing more and more of, right? Is in the past, women stayed in those relationships or had to because of society, right? They didn't have any couldn't own property or didn't have credit cards and that
Right.
is changing. And so we're seeing women say, well, you know what? Like it would be easier instead of having 3 children, one being your spouse or 5 children, one being your spouse, it's easier to go it alone. And so
Yeah.
I think that's an important conversation that's happening, especially online. And I hope that we see more men like enter that conversation, be like, okay, this is a problem and why, and
Hmm.
let's be part of the change.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a few closing questions that we ask every
Sure.
guest. So before I do that, is there anything you think I've missed or that you want to leave listeners with?
No, I think the big thing is, if you found yourself here, I think the the first step is just being able to acknowledge it yourself
Mhm.
and be able to put words to it yourself and start to understand your own feelings because it can be really weird to feel like you have all this resentment built up inside of you and you don't know why. So my biggest thing and that I hope my content does in these conversations too is just acknowledges what you're feeling as valid and real. And then from there you get to decide kind of the path forward. Right. But acknowledgement itself is a step. And I think that's important.
Yes, that's it. That's a really important step. Some of these questions I think you've probably already answered. So let's see.
Okay.
Can you share a rule you've broken that turned out to be a great decision?
Hmm. I don't know. Here's the problem. I'm a rule follower. Like I tell people this all the time. I'm a people pleaser. I'm afraid of authority. Like at my core, I'm like a typical eldest daughter syndrome. Like I I don't like to break rules.
Maybe
Uh,
what about the rule women are told to be quiet?
yeah,
And
you know what? Fine. That rule for sure. Like I The funny thing is, in my real life, I don't like confrontation. Online, for some reason, I am not afraid of it. And
You're
so,
so well spoken, Paige. Like when you respond
oh,
to these
thank you.
comments and you have these concise and you're a fast thinker, I'm like, how does she do that? Just like
Yeah, my husband used to be like, I hate fighting with you because I can't, you're saying a lot of things really fast and I don't know, like I can't keep up or articulate it the way you're saying it. And so actually in my life I have to slow that thought down. On social media it works better. But yeah, I think that is true. Like the rule is like saying the unspoken thing, right? Like
mhm.
saying these things. Thank you for highlighting this. But like yeah, saying these things that oftentimes we as women are told to be quiet on and to feel like we're blessed and not focus on the negative. I think it's
Yes.
okay to talk about these things and still love being a mom and a wife and all these things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because then you'll get like, why did you have kids then? It's like, for goodness
Yeah,
sakes,
I
like
get that all
stop,
the time.
stop
Yeah.
what we're trying
Laundry
to say.
has nothing to do with my relationship with my children. That is a consequence of having children. It is not folding laundry is not parenting. It's just not.
Yes. And just the fact that it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's
Yeah.
hard. And I think that's important too. I mean, this is getting off topic of the rapid fire, but when I feel like when I had kids, I just had no idea what I was getting into. And I don't want to
Yeah.
scare people from it because it's such a beautiful experience. And as my kids are getting older, like just having like a friend and somebody who likes shopping and has some of the
Yeah.
same interests as you, like it's
Yeah.
amazing. Um, but I also think it's important we're honest and open so people know what they're getting into.
I think so. I think
Who's
so too.
who's a woman who continually inspires you?
Yeah. Um, I think my sister inspires me because she's really good at setting boundaries.
Mm.
And like I said, I'm not. And so that is that for me. I think a lot of women too, we have a hard time doing that. We have a hard
Right,
time setting boundaries around our time, around our interactions with other people.
for
We've been taught
sure.
to just people please, and I definitely struggle with that. So that's always really she's sometimes for me in an uncomfortable way very good at setting boundaries. But I do look up to it in a sense.
Yeah, amazing. What's one book that has significantly impacted your wisdom or perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Fair Play was definitely the light bulb one for me. I mean, there's definitely so many books, but that one, at least in the context of this conversation, opened my eyes.
Right.
A few others, I think, I really like Fed Up and Emotional Labor. Emotional Labor is Rose Hackman, Fed Up is Gemma Hartley. All really good books. I think if you're kind of in a place where you're feeling a lot of feelings and not sure why, those books are helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time
Yeah.
today. I know our listeners will get a lot out of what you shared and hopefully we'll follow you online too because you're doing a lot of really important work. Thank
Thank
you.
you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Women Don't Do That. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating or review. Connect with us on Instagram at Women Don't Do That and visit our website www.womendon'tdothat.com for more details. Join our Patreon to support our work. Find all of the links in the show notes. Remember, you have the power to transform your what ifs into let's go. Together, let's redefine your possible. Until next time.